The corporate world calls it supply chain logistics, but I always called it babysitting 3,000 tons of rolling steel. For 22 long years, I was the quiet engine keeping Miller Freight Systems from falling apart. If you bought a lawnmower in Ohio or fresh produce in the middle of winter, I was the sole reason those goods actually reached the shelves. I was the principal contract specialist, which was basically code for the person who knew where every single operational disaster was buried. I did not occupy a grand corner office with sweeping views of the city skyline. My workspace was an outdated cubicle that smelled faintly of stale coffee and burnt paper, hidden deep within the noisy basement of our headquarters. The quiet down there allowed me to monitor the steady rhythm of our entire network. I could predict a port delay on the West Coast 3 days before the harbor master even realized there was a problem. I knew precisely which transport carriers padded their mileage logs, and which independent drivers would push through a blinding snowstorm simply because they owed me a personal favor. Before I explain how I brought down a multi-million-dollar enterprise with a handful of emails, let me clarify something important. I never set out to be a destroyer. I simply wanted to perform my duties without unnecessary interference. The chaos began when our respected founder retired to his sprawling estate in southern Europe. He was a demanding boss, but he understood the hard realities of the transport business. We maintained a mutual respect. I kept his trucks moving across the country, and he ensured my authority remained absolute. Then his successor arrived. Tanner was 32 years old, holding an expensive business degree purchased by his father, and possessing teeth so bright they seemed almost artificial. He marched into the executive suite wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my automobile, radiating unearned confidence and heavy cologne. Tanner had no concept of basic freight management, yet suddenly he was making critical operational decisions. During his very first month, he eliminated our dedicated night maintenance crew to cut overhead, which predictably resulted in broken equipment within 48 hours. By his third month, he was constantly accompanied by a woman named Chloe, whom he appointed as our new cultural relations director. I tried my absolute best to stay focused on my duties. I had managed to survive severe economic recessions, supply shortages, and catastrophic system failures using nothing more than physical maps and landline phones. I convinced myself I could easily tolerate Tanner. However, Tanner clearly despised my presence. To him, I represented an outdated era because I preferred direct phone calls over flashy digital chat applications. He saw me as a useless leftover from the past, while I saw him as a fragile figurehead bound to crash the moment real trouble hit. The turning point occurred on an exhausting Tuesday afternoon. I was deeply focused on renegotiating an essential shipping agreement with a notoriously difficult maritime union. These harbor workers were tough negotiators who did not tolerate corporate games. I had spent 4 continuous hours on the phone with their chief representative, carefully smoothing out a tricky rate dispute that would secure our vital southern transport routes for the next 5 years. Tanner suddenly strolled past my desk with Chloe following closely behind. He casually demanded that I clear off my cluttered desk, claiming the piles of paperwork looked terrible for visiting investors. My work surface was covered with critical manifests, shipping orders, and handwritten route notes that kept our operations running smoothly. I covered the phone receiver and quietly explained that I was in the middle of securing our southern shipping routes, warning him that forcing me to stop would cost us the deal. He merely offered a condescending smile and claimed that modern software made all my physical paperwork completely obsolete. He instructed me to move everything to the digital cloud immediately and casually walked away while Chloe giggled under her breath. The union representative was still waiting on the line and asked if everything was all right. I swallowed my growing frustration, assured him it was just a minor distraction, and successfully finalized the contract. That single deal secured $40 million in revenue for the company over the following quarter. Did I receive a word of gratitude from management? Absolutely not. Instead, I received an automated reprimand regarding company workspace appearance standards. Yet the final breaking point was not caused by everyday workload stress. It was the complete lack of personal respect that ultimately ignited the flame. It happened in the middle of October, right as our peak shipping season reached its highest volume. Everything was moving simultaneously, and I was working 14-hour shifts fueled by sheer willpower. Suddenly, an urgent notification appeared in my inbox mandating attendance at Tanner's upcoming birthday celebration at his private residence. The event was scheduled for Saturday evening, which happened to be the single busiest operational night of the entire quarter. That specific Saturday required my constant personal supervision to clear an enormous shipment of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals through federal inspection. A delay of just a few hours would spoil the entire shipment and trigger millions in insurance liability. I composed a short, polite response explaining that I could not attend due to mandatory live monitoring of a high-value shipment, wishing him a good celebration instead. I assumed that my rational, professional explanation would settle the matter completely. I was entirely wrong. The following morning, the atmosphere inside the office felt remarkably heavy and silent. When I sat down at my desk and attempted to log into my workstation, the computer screen displayed an error message stating my access was denied. I tried entering my password a second time, but the system locked me out completely. Before I could investigate, I heard the sharp sound of designer shoes approaching my desk. Tanner appeared alongside Chloe and two uniformed security guards who appeared thoroughly uncomfortable. Tanner adjusted his expensive necktie and coldly announced that the company was transitioning toward a new leadership vision. He claimed my refusal to participate in team-building activities demonstrated a complete lack of commitment to company culture. I looked at him calmly and asked directly if he was terminating my employment simply because I chose to monitor critical freight instead of attending his party. Chloe chimed in with her squeaky voice, rambling about the importance of surrounding themselves with people who matched their personal energy. I ignored her completely and fixed my gaze on Tanner. I reminded him that I personally held the authority codes for thousands of shipping terminals, union agreements, and customs clearance protocols that would not simply transfer to a computer system. Tanner merely laughed, declared that every employee was easily replaceable, and demanded my access badge. I did not raise my voice, cry, or cause a scene. I quietly reached into my jacket, removed my security badge, and dropped it into his hand. I picked up my purse along with a small photo of my dog, and calmly walked toward the exit. As the elevator doors slowly closed on Tanner's smug expression, I glanced at my watch. The time was 9:15 in the morning, and within 30 minutes, the entire national freight network was going to realize its central core had just been completely removed. The cool air outside smelled faintly of rain, but for the first time in 2 decades, I felt entirely free. I walked over to my old SUV, tossed my belongings onto the seat, and sat quietly listening to the rain hit the windshield. Most people in my position would panic about financial uncertainty, but my mind immediately shifted into full strategic execution. Only this time, I was no longer solving problems for the company, I was creating them. I reached for my personal phone, opened my personal email application, and prepared to send a message to every major carrier, harbor chief, and customs supervisor I had worked with over the last 20 years. I drafted a clear, legally bulletproof notification stating that I was no longer employed by the firm and could no longer act as the certified authority for active operational agreements. I specifically referenced a forgotten continuity clause present in all our master contracts. Years ago, our founder had inserted a specific trust clause stating that if key administrative personnel left the firm, vendors possessed the immediate right to halt operations or demand upfront payment until new leadership was fully verified. Tanner obviously had no idea this clause existed. I systematically hit send on dozens of emails, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction with every message delivered. Within minutes, my phone began ringing incessantly. The chief union representative from the southern port was the first to call, loudly asking why his messages to my former work address were suddenly bouncing back. I casually informed him that Tanner had terminated my position to improve company culture. He laughed bitterly and immediately declared that if I was not personally supervising the hazardous chemical transports scheduled for that evening, his drivers would not move a single truck. He invoked the contract continuity clause on the spot, confirming that every single one of his vehicles would remain parked until further notice. One major domino had officially fallen, and I started my car with a subtle smile. I drove down the road to a small roadside diner frequently used by long-haul drivers. I set up my laptop on a corner table, ordered a large cup of black coffee, and watched the chaos unfold remotely. Using a public transport monitoring network, I began tracking the sudden stoppage of Miller freight vehicles across the country. Bright red indicators were appearing all over the digital map, signaling that dozens of transport trucks were coming to a complete halt outside major distribution hubs. Gate passcodes were scheduled for a mandatory security reset that very morning, a procedure only I knew how to manually execute. Without those codes, no driver could enter or exit the facilities. Messages from confused logistics managers and legal representatives began pouring into my personal inbox. I calmly replied to each one, stating that I no longer possessed the authority to grant system access and advising them to contact Tanner directly. At 12:30, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from a visibly panicked Chloe. I took a slow sip of my coffee and answered the line with complete professional composure. Chloe practically shrieked through the speaker, hysterically explaining that dozens of furious drivers were stuck outside locked gates and demanding that I hand over the master system passcodes immediately. I gently informed her that I no longer had authorization to access company servers, reminding her that sharing secure network credentials with unauthorized individuals was a serious violation of federal digital privacy laws. She screamed in frustration, claiming the entire corporate computer system was demanding a multi-factor authentication code that was being sent directly to my personal phone. I chuckled softly and explained that the former security provider had locked the authentication settings to my personal device years ago. I politely informed her that since I was no longer an employee, I could not assist her, and promptly ended the call. Later that evening, I received a frantic message from the accounting supervisor letting me know that Tanner was currently surrounded by shouting department heads while the main office phone lines rang endlessly. Major corporate clients were threatening massive breach of contract lawsuits, and total operational gridlock had crippled the entire distribution network. The entire multi-million-dollar operation was paralyzed simply because an arrogant executive assumed human expertise could be effortlessly replaced by a spreadsheet. Sitting comfortably in that quiet diner, I finished the last of my coffee with absolute peace of mind. I had spent 2 decades selflessly keeping their chaotic world running without recognition. Now, as the entire empire crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance, I realized that standing up for my worth was the most satisfying delivery I had ever made.